I love the sentence in the Proust essay. I can only paraphrase, I can't quote it verbatim, but he says something like, you never in life live as intensely again as you did live when you were a child reading on these afternoons which you thought you were missing out on because you were reading. So as a child you thought, oh, I missed another afternoon. I missed another afternoon of life because I was just reading. I was so focused, so concentrated. I was so much in the book. And later in life you look back and you think, I never lived as intensely as a child reading on these long afternoons. That's what Proust says, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. Well, when I was a child, there were books everywhere in my parents' household. We had a huge library with many old books, like from my grandfather and from the father of my grandfather. First editions of some of the great German romantic writers like Hoffmann or Brentano, and lots of expressionist writers who were fashionable when my grandfather was young, so he read a lot of that. And my grandfather was a novelist himself. He wrote 2 novels, and he had known some of the great writers in Austria of the day, like Joseph Roth, and I know he knew Joseph Roth. I'm not sure he knew Zweig, but he certainly knew Roth. So, and my father was a television and theater director, and he had read books and loved books all his life. So all these books were there, and also so it was very natural to be interested in literature. And my father started reading to me very early. So he read ballads to me, like the great dramatic ballads of Goethe and Schiller, who had for a year had written these very dramatic long poems. It's called ballad in German. In kind of a battle. They battled themselves writing these they battled each other writing dramatic poems, which is something that children find amazing, like poems with a lot of really drastic, brutal stuff happening. So this combination of great plots with a really complex, beautiful language, that was present to me very early. And so I started to read very early. And I think, that's a theory of mine, I think one of the few things all writers have in common is that they were reading children, that they were children who loved to read. And I was one of these children, and so it was quite natural for me also to try to write something myself when I was quite young. And I always felt I liked books so much. I always felt if things work out well, if I'm lucky, then I would like to be a writer later in life. I always felt, when I saw my father work as a director, I saw how much you depend on other people when you do theater or film. You depend on other people not just for the outcome of your work, for what it looks like, for what it sounds like, for what it will be like. You even depend on other people for whether you are able to work at all. As a director, raising money, convincing TV stations, you have to do so much work of talking to people, convincing people, selling your idea to people before you can actually get to work. And I remember that even as a small child, I felt like I don't want that. I don't want to have to sell my idea to 20 complicated, skeptical people to be able to maybe start turning it into reality. I want to do something where I can actually just do it. And that's of course the case with writing. You can, you can be in prison and they don't give you paper, then you can't write. But in any other situation in life, when you have just a little bit of time, you are actually able to write if you feel like it. Even if they don't publish you, you are able to write. And I always felt, and I felt very early, that this is a wonderful freedom that you have as a writer, that even a painter doesn't have that. A painter needs more than a writer. Not that I could have been a painter. I'm absolutely not gifted. I'm not gifted for painting. I'm not gifted for music. I couldn't do anything there. But I always loved this freedom of a writer to be so self-sufficient and self-contained. So if you can make it happen just on your own, but then of course also if you fail, you can't blame it on anybody else. That's always, I always felt that too. Well, one of the strange things about writing is that you actually don't remember much about the situation of doing it. I remember a lot of thinking about my books, planning them. I remember a lot of things that happened around the process of writing them. But when it comes to the actual process of sitting at your table and being concentrated and working, and I asked other writers about that, and they have similar experience. It's just the way concentration works, or a certain focus works. You don't remember much about it. So, and I think it is true that in writing, a slightly different personality takes over. I don't want it to sound like there is anything magical or metaphysical or irrational about it. It's just something psychological, that there is a certain other person hidden inside you who takes over in writing. And hopefully that person is more funny, more daring, more thoughtful, more intelligent than the everyday personality, hopefully. So I don't know much about it. It is true that writing is a solitary thing. It's something you're alone with yourself, or you're alone with that other person that you are too while you are writing. I don't have a good answer to what kind of author I want to be. I believe that there are many different kinds of good books. So for example, I really don't want to write realist political novels. That's not something that interests me. But I know very good novels of that kind. So many writers just define literature as the kind of thing they do best. And things that are different from that, they claim this is not real literature. This is not what literature should be like. And I think that's a weakness I'm trying to avoid. I'm aware of the fact that there are very good writers who do things that I wouldn't want to do and wouldn't be able to do. And so it's not about forming a theory and deciding this is what literature should be like, so this is what I'm going to do. It's all more about finding out what you can do as an artist. And this is not something you know beforehand. You have to find out for yourself with false starts and attempts at things that work out and things that don't work out, and it's kind of a messy process. So I did find out that I like a certain kind of dark comedy, and this is something I think I'm good at to work with certain comic effects, but also dark comic effects, like not hilarious, not light, bright comedy, but more a certain kind of dark comedy. At least that might be where I'm developing with the last two books. But that's not a decision I made before. That's something that I found out afterwards. And I feel about certain things. People tell me stories, or I hear stories, and I feel, yes, that could be an amazing novel, but not for me. So sometimes I even feel like calling a writer friend and tell him or her that would be a good novel for you and not for me. But other writers know what they want to do, so that doesn't make sense to make that kind of call. But yeah, I'm not sure that answer makes a lot of sense. But so I think part of the artist's life is to find out what he or she can do, and then also to accept that there are some things you can do and some things you cannot do as well. But then also to not be totally content with that, but to try new things, to try to stretch your limitations. So for example, with my last novel, with F, writing about three brothers, I realized that one of the great things that writing about brothers gives you as an opportunity is that you can send them out into different social milieus. You can send them out into different social worlds, and then if you don't do that, you miss out on a real opportunity. Of course, you can write about three brothers who move into the same milieu, but I felt like as a writer I should use this opportunity, and then I realized I had never written about social milieu before. I haven't been that kind of a realist novelist who really analyzes a milieu and creates an atmosphere of a certain social world. And then I felt like, but I should really do this. And although so far it hasn't been my kind of thing, I want to make it my kind of thing, and let's see whether it works. So yeah, it's always like that. You feel there are things you can do best and you can just do them. And then you feel you shouldn't be totally content with what you can do best. You should try to do new things also. And then there's a big zone of things where you feel I really can't do that and I don't want to do that. And it's always a negotiation, a certain negotiation with yourself to move in that sphere. Chance or coincidence is something that really, I'm thinking about that a lot. It bothers me a lot because we as human beings, we tend to see any kind of status quo as partly necessary. We cannot really accept the idea of total coincidence. So yeah, I was lucky enough to have a big success with the book and then with the following books too, but it could have turned out completely different with the same books by just a few coincidences being different. But that goes without saying. But if you follow that thought to the end, there's also absolutely no, I could have been somebody else, or I couldn't have been born at all if some small detail that happened to some of my ancestors 4 generations ago would have been different. So it's a vertigo-inducing thought that absolutely everything in life could be completely different. And we would have the same feeling of, yeah, everything's fine the way it is, everything's kind of had to be this way. We would have the same feeling just because that's how we are made up psychologically. And yeah, that really bothers me a lot, because like everybody, I feel that there's a lot of inner logic to my life, and that I am where I should be, and that everything in my life makes sense and will make sense when I go on living. And then I think that's just how I'm used to look at things. And well, Kundera, in this famous title of his most famous novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, he put it perfectly, because the total lightness of being, meaning that everything could be different, and it doesn't really it doesn't really make a difference whether everything would be different or not. It's an unbearable lightness. It is unbearable. And yeah, so I tried to explore that in the novel, in my last novel, not by addressing the question straight on, but by letting the question kind of arise from the things happening in the book. It's really something that concerns me personally to no end, and but I don't have a fixed answer to how to deal with that, and I think that's always the best position to write stories from and to write novels from, to write about questions that are really important to us, but towards which we also feel deeply ambivalent. Ambivalence, the novel is the art form of ambivalence, and that's what it should be like. No, I'm not free of considerations of the burden of German history, and I don't think any German writer should be free of that. But I also don't think it has to be in every book all the time. It's still possible to be a German writer and to write books which are not concerned with the burden of German history, but that doesn't mean that this is not an extremely important topic, and that as a person you should always be aware of that, and that as an artist this is a very important subject to tackle sooner or later. And also if you write about Germany seriously and with open eyes, it will always come up sooner or later. I mean, many people liked my historical novel, Measuring the World, because they said finally a novel about German history which didn't touch the Nazis. But in a certain way that was also there. There is a scene when Humboldt when Humboldt learns about the huge amount of human sacrifices made by the Aztecs. And he says, so much civilization and so much cruelty, that's the opposite of what we Germans stand for. And of course, when I let him say that, I felt like that was a very dark, ironic moment, and also a sad moment, because Humboldt, of course, he could have said that. He would have been totally right to say that back then, but for a modern reader, it turns into an ironic, dark joke. So I felt like even if you write about Humboldt, at some points of the story, what happened later will be there and will be part of the story, even will be part of the story for a contemporary reader who cannot just forget what happened later. So, but what I also think is that it doesn't mean that as a German writer you have the obligation to write serious, sad, realist novels which take part in the Nazi era. So it's not. What I do think is there are so many mediocre novels who gain some semblance of real importance and weight just because they deal with these issues, that it's often used as a too easy way to seriousness and weight. So if you write something that deals with the dark side of German past, it better be something extremely good. And I haven't found out for myself how to deal with that in a really original way, and to do something with it that hasn't been done before. But that would be a great task, and I'm very aware of the fact that this would be a big topic. So I'm not saying I don't care. It's the opposite.